Truistery Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
Truistery Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. By the time the roses wilted, she had already stopped crying. Calla Rivers had a way of making everything around her bloom, even when she was breaking inside. To the world, she had it all. A home that looked like it belonged in an interior design magazine, a husband whose jawline could rival a movie star's, and a life filled with curated brunches and Instagram-worthy vacations. But what nobody knew, what not even her closest friends could guess, was that her smile was muscle memory.
practiced, polished, performed.
Her husband, Cole Merrick, was charming in all the ways that mattered to everyone but her. He worked in finance, spoke in numbers, and kissed her forehead like a man who was checking something off a list. His love had once been real, or at least convincing. Lately, it felt like it belonged to someone else. Or maybe it never belonged to her in the first place. Their home in Cedar Hollow, a picturesque suburb just outside Portland, Oregon, was quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Suffocating quiet. The kind of quiet where you could hear your thoughts echo too loudly. The kind where you started to doubt which ones were yours. Calla had just turned 30. 30, and she felt like a ghost inside her own life. On the morning it started to unravel, the sun was shining the way it always did when life was about to collapse. Cruelly, brightly. She stood barefoot in their modern kitchen, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of hibiscus tea, watching condensation bead along the marble countertop. Cole was already gone, of course. He always left early for the gym.
Or so he said.
She wandered into his home office, something she rarely did. Not out of respect, but out of instinct. Some doors feel better left unopened. That morning, however, something pulled her in. A scent, lavender and cologne, hung in the air. Feminine. Not hers. The laptop was open. She knew his passwords. She didn't want to look, but she did. It took less than 60 seconds to destroy 10 years of marriage. There it was. The message thread with someone named Harper. Last night was everything. Miss you already. Followed by a photo. Nothing graphic. Just intimate. His head on her shoulder. The kind of closeness Calla hadn't felt in months.
Years, maybe.
She sat down on the edge of the leather office chair. The room suddenly spinning like the inside of a snow globe someone had shaken too hard. Her tea was still warm, untouched. Her fingers trembled. And then, in the stillness, a voice in her head whispered, "You already knew. You just didn't want it to be true." When Cole returned that evening, he smelled of peppermint gum and department store guilt. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, she cooked his favorite: seared salmon, garlic asparagus, and roasted red potatoes. She set the table, lit a candle, and smiled through dinner like a woman rehearsing her role one last time. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. They went to bed that night as strangers. Her body next to his, but her mind miles away. The next day, she called in sick to work. Not that anyone at her part-time design consulting gig would notice. She walked aimlessly through downtown Portland, her coat buttoned tight even though it wasn't cold. She stopped at a bookstore, flipped through a poetry book she wouldn't buy, and lingered near the flower stand outside. There were peonies. Her favorite. Her mother used to say peonies only bloom when they trust the season. She bought a bouquet. Not for Cole. Not for the house. For herself. That evening, as she stood in front of the mirror brushing her hair, she caught her own eyes and didn't recognize the woman staring back. There were cracks behind her eyes. Cracks too subtle for strangers to see, but too deep to ignore. She picked up her phone and texted her sister, Jess, who lived in Montana. "If I leave him, will that make me the villain?" Jess replied within seconds. "Leaving isn't weakness, Calla. Staying when you're empty is." She didn't cry that night. Not because she wasn't sad, but because something deeper than sadness had begun to settle inside her. A clarity, a quiet rage, a will to reclaim herself. The following morning, Cole mentioned a business trip to Seattle. She nodded. She waited until he packed and left. Then she opened the closet, pulled out a suitcase, and began folding her life into neat, quiet bundles. She wasn't running. She was choosing herself. But just as she zipped the suitcase shut, the door clicked open. Cole had forgotten his laptop. The silence that followed was loud. She turned to see him frozen in the entryway, staring at the packed suitcase. He narrowed his eyes. Going somewhere? She inhaled slowly. Yes. He walked closer. Calla, don't be dramatic. Don't insult me, she said, her voice low but firm. I saw the messages. Harper. He flinched just barely. It didn't mean anything. That's the part that hurts the most, she said. That I meant nothing, too. He opened his mouth to respond, but she held up her hand. I'm not here for excuses. I'm not here for apologies you don't mean. I'm here to leave. She picked up the suitcase, walked past him, and paused only once at the threshold. You killed us long before Harper, she said. You just didn't bother to notice. Then she left. No screaming. No slamming doors. Just the click of heels on hardwood and the soft thud of a heart choosing freedom over familiarity. She drove for hours without a destination. The rain followed her, gentle at first, then harder. By the time she reached the Oregon coast, the sky was weeping. She pulled over at a rest stop, got out, and let the rain soak her. She tilted her face to the clouds and breathed. It wasn't peace.
Not yet.
But it was the start. That night, she checked into a roadside inn with floral wallpaper and a faulty heater. She curled into bed with her journal and wrote for the first time in months. Not about him. About her. About the girl she used to be before Cole. The girl who loved painting, used to sing off-key, and dreamed of running a flower shop. The girl who once believed she was enough. She fell asleep with ink on her fingers and salt on her cheeks. Not from tears. From the ocean breeze sneaking through the cracked window. The next morning, she woke up early. For the first time in years, she didn't check her phone. She didn't check her email. She simply got up, opened the window wide, and let the sound of waves remind her that the world was bigger than her pain. Calla Rivers wasn't healed, but she was awake, and that was a beginning. The chill in the New England air had always comforted Rosalind. It reminded her of quiet Decembers spent wrapped in her father's flannel coats, of slow walks through snow-powdered streets, and of hot cider shared under porch lights. But in that winter of her 32nd year, the cold no longer comforted. It cut. 6 months into their move to Asheville, a quiet coastal town in Maine, Rosalind found herself trapped in a house that looked perfect on paper, but echoed with loneliness. It had been Carter's idea to relocate. A fresh start, he'd said. Away from the noise. Just us. What she hadn't realized was that the silence he craved wasn't geographical, it was emotional. The first sign was small. A missed dinner. Then 2. Then a week of Carter working late. Returning home smelling not of construction sites, but hotel soap. When she confronted him, he dismissed her with a chuckle. You're reading into things, he'd say, brushing her cheek like she was a child having a nightmare. You know how deadlines are. She wanted to believe him, wanted to chalk up the growing distance to stress, to weather, to anything but betrayal. But belief is a fragile thing. And it shattered one Sunday morning when she found a receipt tucked in his coat, 2 glasses of wine, an appetizer, and a single entree. All billed to a luxury bistro 2 towns away. She didn't cry. Not then. Not even when she Googled the restaurant and saw it was ranked among the most romantic spots in southern Maine. Instead, she went to the kitchen, brewed tea, and sat by the window, watching the gray sky shift. That's when the numbness began. Not sadness. Not anger. Just an eerie stillness. As though her body had decided to pause emotion until it had proof. But proof, like secrets, never stays hidden forever. 3 weeks later, It came like thunder on a windless day. Her friend, Maggie, a barista who worked part-time at a boutique downtown, texted her a photo. Carter, at a holiday market, laughing with a brunette in a red scarf. The woman's hand rested lightly on his chest. "I wasn't sure if I should send this," the message read. "But you deserve to know." The picture wasn't scandalous. There were no kisses, no embraces. But intimacy has many faces. And Rosalind recognized the look in his eyes. She'd seen it once, on their honeymoon in Vermont, when Carter watched her dance barefoot in the snow. That look was now directed at someone else. She printed the photo, framed it, placed it on their nightstand. When Carter came home that night, she said nothing, just pointed to the frame.
He stared at it.
Then at her. Then back again. "You had someone follow me?" he asked. She laughed. A brittle, bitter sound.
No.
"The world is just small when you're sloppy." He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again. Instead, he walked to the window and stared into the dark. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he finally said. Rosalind's fingers curled around the armrest of the chair. "Then why did it?" Silence. The kind that roars louder than words. For the next hour, neither spoke. He slept on the couch. She in their bed, where the sheets smelled of lavender and lies. In the weeks that followed, they fell into a strange rhythm. Polite. Distant. Like strangers pretending to be roommates. She made breakfast. He took long drives. She gardened. He avoided eye contact. Rosalind told no one. Not even Maggie. Shame, she discovered, had a way of growing roots in silence. Until one night in January, when she woke up gasping from a dream, her father standing in a field of snow, holding out a coat she couldn't reach. She sat up, heart pounding, and whispered to the dark, "What am I doing?" The next morning, she packed a bag and drove to her sister's in New Hampshire. Carter texted once. "Where are you?" She replied, "Somewhere I remember who I am." In the sanctuary of her sister's sunlit kitchen, Rosalind finally cried. Not for the marriage, but for the version of herself that had shrunk to fit it. For days, she did nothing.
Slept. Ate.
Cried some more. And then, one morning, she took a notebook and began to write. She wrote about the silence between them, about the way Carter looked at her like she was wallpaper. About the way she'd stopped looking at herself in the mirror because she no longer recognized the woman staring back. And then she wrote this. "Sometimes love doesn't die. It drifts. And by the time you notice, it's already too far to swim back." By February, she returned to Asheville, not to reconcile, but to reclaim. The house was still. Carter was gone on a supposed business trip. She didn't care. She needed closure. She walked room to room, touching memories. The kitchen where he first kissed her after the move. The hallway where they danced to Sinatra. The spare bedroom where she once dreamed of painting. That night, she burned the photo frame, watched the embers glow. And in that quiet, she made a decision. She would not wait for Carter to end things. She would end them. When he returned, she handed him a letter.
No scouting. No tears.
Just a note. "I loved you.
Deeply.
But I love myself more. This house is yours. The future is mine." He didn't fight. Perhaps he, too, had felt the shatter long before the break. She left that evening. A single suitcase, her journal, and a seed of something fierce blooming in her chest. Freedom, she discovered, doesn't begin with leaving. It begins with the decision that you deserve more. The bus screeched to a halt beneath the faded green sign that read "Welcome to Havenbrook." The air outside was colder than Calla had expected, crisp and clean, unlike the stifling warmth of Belmare, where memories stuck like the humidity. She stepped off with nothing but a battered suitcase and a backpack half filled with what was left of her life. Her mother had begged her to come home. Her best friend Claire had offered a room and a dozen pep talks. But Calla didn't want comfort. She wanted anonymity. And this quiet city, 3 states away from everything she used to be, offered exactly that. She found an apartment above an old bookstore that smelled of paper and pipe smoke. The landlord, Mr. Everly was in his 80s and barely asked any questions.
Perfect.
The rent was cheap, and the walls were thick, thick enough to cry without shame. Thick enough to hide from the echo of a name that used to mean safety. Calla started working at the Bloom Room, a flower shop tucked into a cobblestone street near the edge of the art district. It was owned by a quiet woman named May, who had tattoos up her arms and spoke more with her eyes than her mouth. She didn't ask Calla why she flinched when a man brushed past her shoulder or why she stared a little too long at the lilies before arranging them. May just handed her a pair of gloves, showed her how to prep roses, and told her where the coffee was. That was the beginning of Calla's silence. She didn't speak much. She smiled politely at customers, wrapped bouquets in brown paper, and swept floors at closing time. On days off, she wandered through the city with headphones in her ears, but no music playing. She liked to listen to the city breathe, to the sound of heels on sidewalks, of distant violins from subway performers, of laughter she didn't have to join. But healing isn't linear. Some days, Calla would wake up gasping from dreams where Liam's voice sounded like thunder cracking glass. She'd sit on the floor of her small kitchen, holding a chipped mug of tea, watching the steam disappear like her former self. Other days were better. Like the time an elderly man named Harold came in looking for flowers that smell like forgiveness. Calla handed him freesia and lavender and smiled for real, just once. Then came the day of the glass delivery. The Bloom Room was getting a new display window. Calla helped unpack the panels, her hands trembling slightly as she remembered the last time she'd seen something shatter. Liam's phone against the wall, her own reflection in the mirror after his words sliced her apart. But as she stood by the new window, watching her own blurry silhouette in the reflection, she realized something. She wasn't broken anymore. Just rearranged. Like stained glass fractured, yes, but catching light in a new way. That night, she walked home differently. A man named Julian entered her life the next week. He came into the flower shop looking completely out of place.
Tall.
Sharply dressed in a navy coat, holding a small sketchbook. "I need something dramatic," he said, "for an apology that words can't fix." Calla gave him white tulips and red ranunculus. He didn't ask for her name, but he came back 2 days later. "Still apologizing?" she asked before she could stop herself. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "Trying to," he said. "But also, maybe just looking for an excuse to talk to the florist." She didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. Over the following weeks, Julian became a regular. Sometimes he bought flowers. Sometimes he just sketched the arrangements in his notebook. He told her he was an architect working on a museum renovation. She told him she liked dahlias more than roses. That was as much as she gave. One rainy evening, Julian waited until the shop was empty before asking, "Do you ever go out for coffee? Or are you strictly caffeine behind the counter?" Calla hesitated. Her pulse raced, not with excitement, but fear. But fear wasn't new. Fear had lived in her lungs for months. What was new was curiosity.
"Just coffee," she said.
The coffee turned into conversation. They talked about cities they wanted to visit, books they half-finished, childhood stories that made them laugh. Julian never asked too much. He listened more than he spoke. And when he noticed how she stared at the floor when someone raised their voice at the next table, he quietly changed the subject. She started sketching again. Nothing serious, just little flower doodles in her planner. She hadn't drawn since before the breakdown. Something about Julian made her feel like she could reclaim parts of herself that she thought had died. Still, the walls stayed up. She never told him about Liam. Never mentioned Belmare, or the miscarriage, or the court dates, or the way she used to cry herself to sleep wishing someone would just ask the right question. Until the night it snowed. They had just closed up the shop together. May had gone home early, and the city was wrapped in silence under a fresh blanket of snow. Julian walked her to her door like he had before, and Calla found herself pausing before unlocking it. She turned. "Do you believe people can start over? Not just move on, but actually become someone else?" Julian didn't answer right away. "I think people can heal," he said. "And I think healing looks different than we expect. It's not erasing, it's layering. Like glass. New panes over the cracks. Still fragile, still sharp in places. But beautiful, too. Calla looked at him for a long time. Then she opened the door. Not for him, but for herself. Weeks passed. Spring whispered its arrival in the form of green buds and warmer winds. Calla began to laugh more. Customers noticed. May noticed. She even started leaving her apartment light on at night, no longer afraid of the shadows on her walls. Then, on the first truly warm day of the season, she got a letter. It wasn't from Liam. It wasn't from her lawyer. It wasn't even signed. But the handwriting was familiar. I saw your name in the exhibit credits. You're not invisible anymore. And I hope that means you're happy. I'll never deserve forgiveness. But I hope you find peace anyway. From the man I used to be. She burned the letter in her sink. And that night, for the first time in months, she danced barefoot in her living room with music actually playing. Her scars were still there. Her memories hadn't faded. But the city didn't whisper Liam's name anymore. It whispered her own. Calla Monroe. Florist. Survivor. A woman made of petals and glass and strength. And every morning, as she opened the bloom room's doors, she breathed in the scent of fresh lilies and told herself, "You are not what he did to you. You are what you choose to bloom into." It was a Sunday morning when he walked in, no warning, no dramatic entrance, just the subtle sound of the bell above the door. Calla was arranging pale pink peonies in the front window of the bloom room, sunlight warming her shoulders through the glass. She looked up briefly, offering the standard soft smile she gave to all new customers. He smiled back. Not the kind of smile that demands anything, but the kind that settles quietly into a room, like light through curtains. There was something in his eyes. Kindness, maybe, or grief softened by time. A man trying not to let life harden him completely. He looked to be in his mid-30s. Taller than most, with sun-creased skin and chestnut hair that curled a little over his collar. He wore a dark green canvas jacket and carried a dog-eared paperback in one hand. "Morning," he said, voice smooth but unpolished. "I'm looking for something for a friend. She's having a rough week." Calla tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, gesturing toward the display. "Tell me about her." He paused. "She's tough. Too tough sometimes. But she cries during old movies and apologizes to bugs she finds in the house." Calla let out a soft laugh. "Sounds like she needs sunflowers. And maybe a little eucalyptus to remind her to breathe." He smiled again, this time deeper, eyes crinkling at the edges. "That sounds perfect." As she wrapped the bouquet, they didn't talk much. Just the quiet exchange of names. Calla, Liam. He paid in cash, left a generous tip, and as he reached for the door, he hesitated. "Do you?" he began, then stopped. "Never mind. Thank you." She nodded, but something in her chest flickered. Not fire. Just a pilot light. The next week, he returned. This time he brought coffee. "I wasn't sure how you'd take it," he said, holding out two options. "So I brought both. I guess I get to decide who you are by the one I choose," she teased, reaching for the one without cream. "Bold choice," he said. "Guess I'm not sweet enough for cream and sugar." "I didn't say that. That was the beginning." Liam became a regular in the way that didn't interrupt but quietly integrated. He never overstayed. He never pried. But he always noticed. When Calla had a bandage on her finger, he asked if the roses fought back. When she wore her hair up, he asked if the day was winning or if she was. Bit by bit, she began to look forward to his visits. One afternoon, they sat on the curb outside the shop, sipping lukewarm coffee as the sun began to drop behind the city's skyline. He had finished reading the book he always carried, East of Eden, she'd noticed, and lent it to her without a word. On the inside cover, he'd scribbled, "For when the days are too loud."
Elle.
"Where'd you get the name Liam?" she asked, breaking a lull in their conversation. "My mom liked Irish names," he said. Said it sounded like a lighthouse. She tilted her head. "It does, doesn't it?"
Warm.
Steady. His eyes shifted. "She died when I was 12. Calla didn't answer. She just reached out and touched his wrist. A small gesture, but for both of them, it echoed. Over the following weeks, they talked about loss. About how grief wasn't a season, but a shadow you learned to walk with. Calla never told him everything, never about Belmare or Liam Nex, or the court, but she hinted at edges. The sharp places. The glass. He never asked for more. One stormy evening, Havenbrook lost power. The shop closed early, and Calla walked home with her coat pulled tight. Just as she reached her building, she heard her name. Liam was standing across the street, holding an umbrella. "I figured you'd forget yours." "I didn't forget. I just didn't expect company." He crossed toward her, rain glancing off his umbrella like tiny drumbeats. "May I walk you up?" She hesitated, then nodded. Inside her apartment, the candlelight flickered against the walls, casting gentle shadows. She handed him a dry towel. He wandered over to her bookshelf. "You read Rilke," he said, surprised. "I underlined too," she replied. "It helps me remember what I felt." He pulled a book from the shelf. "Do you ever read your own underlines?" "Only when I forget who I was." He nodded slowly. "Or when you're trying to find who you are again." The room grew quiet. And then, just like that, she kissed him. Not with urgency, not with a need to forget, but with something softer. Something like trust, newly born and still trembling. When they pulled apart, he didn't try to turn it into something else. He simply held her hand and said, "I'll wait for whatever you're ready to give." And he did. Weeks passed. They shared morning walks, late-night poems, and inside jokes that belonged to no one else. But healing is complicated. Some days, Calla woke up and forgot she could be happy. Other days, she remembered too much. Then came the photo. It was tucked inside her mailbox, no return address. Just a picture of her and Liam outside the Bloom Room. A note was scrawled on the back. "You can change your city, Calla, but not your past." Her hands shook. She dropped it. Liam found her hours later, curled up on her kitchen floor, eyes red. He didn't ask questions. He just sat beside her, took the photo, and burned it in her sink. "I don't care what you ran from," he said. "I only care where you're going." She looked at him, this man who asked for nothing but gave everything, and whispered, "I want to go where you are." He smiled. "Then let's build it. One room at a time." And so, they did. They planted herbs on her windowsill. They painted her bathroom pale seafoam. They made plans for a road trip down the coast. Calla began to laugh again. To sing along to music while she worked. To believe that maybe, just maybe, her heart was not ruined but rewired. One night, curled up beneath a quilt in her apartment, Liam read from a notebook he'd kept hidden. "You were the light I wasn't looking for, and the quiet I didn't know I needed." She pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "You're not just a lighthouse. You're the shore I didn't drown on." And he held her like he never planned to let go. It began with a knock on the door. Not a text, not a call, just the sound of knuckles rapping against wood, slow, hesitant, like someone summoning the courage with every tap. Calla wasn't expecting anyone. Liam was at his studio, and the florist shop was closed for the long weekend. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon tea and lavender oil. She padded barefoot across the room, sweater sleeves tugged over her palms. And when she opened the door, her breath stopped. It was Cole. He hadn't changed much. The same tousled chestnut hair. The same sharp jawline that once made her feel like she could lean forever against his strength. But his eyes, they were different. No longer arrogant. No longer cold. Just tired. Hollowed out. "Hey,
Calla."
Her fingers gripped the doorframe. "What are you doing here?"
I
came to talk. Can I come in?" She stepped aside, not because she forgave him, but because ghosts don't disappear by slamming the door. They linger. And sometimes, they demand exorcism. He walked in like someone returning to a former life, slow and unsure. She watched him take in the space, her couch, her bookshelf, the picture of her and Liam on the windowsill. "That him?" he asked, voice low. She didn't answer. He sat on the edge of her chair. hands clasped. I've been in therapy. Since last year. I had to face what I did, who I was with you. I was cruel, Calla. And blind. She said nothing. I came to say I'm sorry. But also, he looked up, eyes raw. I still love you. Her stomach turned. Not because she felt the same, but because for a flicker of a second, the old wounds remembered their ache. I know I have no right, he continued. But I thought maybe we could try again. Start over. Calla crossed her arms. You think after everything, I can just forget? That time froze waiting for your redemption arc. I don't expect anything, he whispered. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. She sat across from him. A silence settled, thick and suffocating. I built myself back from the ashes you left me in, coal, she said slowly. Brick by trembling brick. Do you know how hard it was to believe I deserved peace? His voice cracked. I know. I just thought maybe I could be part of that peace now.
She stood.
You don't get to show up with your apology and rewrite the ending. I'm not trying to rewrite. I just want a new chapter. She turned away. You don't belong in this book anymore. That night, Calla couldn't sleep. Liam returned around midnight and found her curled on the balcony. Blanket around her shoulders, journal open in her lap. He didn't ask questions. He just sat beside her, his silence more comforting than any word. I saw him today, she finally said.
Cole.
Liam's jaw tightened, but he nodded. How do you feel? Like a wind from an old storm just passed through, she said. Not strong enough to knock me over, but enough to shake the window panes. Do you need time? He asked gently. To think. I don't need time to know what I want, she said. But I think I need to say goodbye properly. Not for him. For me. Liam nodded. Whatever you need, I'm here. And so she wrote. The goodbye letter.
Cole.
I don't know what you expected when you knocked on my door.
I don't know what you saw when you looked at me.
Did you expect the woman who once waited in bed for your return like a forgotten candle? Or the one who folded into herself every time you walked away mid-argument? I am not her anymore. You said you're healing. That you've changed. And maybe you have. Maybe your nights are quieter now. Maybe your guilt finally built you into a man you can stand. But that man is no longer meant for me. You didn't just hurt me, you buried me. And while you moved on, I had to climb out of that grave with nothing but dirt-stained hope and trembling hands. I had to unlearn the sound of your voice in every silence. I had to teach myself how to want sunlight again. Do you know what it's like to flinch at kindness? To mistrust a warm hand because the last one burned? You didn't break me, but you sure tried. And yet, here I am, heart stitched back together not because of you, but in spite of you. There's a man who waits patiently when my ghosts rise, who doesn't need me broken to feel strong, who looks at me like I'm not something to fix, but something to protect. I don't love you anymore.
Cole.
But I forgive you. Not because you asked, because I deserve to let go.
Please don't come back.
Calla. She sealed the letter with trembling hands. The next morning, she walked to the edge of Havenbrook's Riverwalk and dropped it into the public mailbox. She didn't even look back. When she returned, Liam was in the kitchen, pouring coffee. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. It's done, she said softly. He handed her a mug, kissed her forehead. You're free now. She exhaled. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like she was holding her breath. Healing wasn't a straight line. Calla had heard that phrase tossed around like a feel-good slogan, the kind you'd find in therapists' offices or printed on pastel-toned Instagram quotes. But living it, actually living it, was nothing like she imagined. Some days, the sunlight felt warmer. Some days, Liam's arms were enough to quiet the memories. Some days, she laughed at the smallest things, like when he accidentally dropped flour on the cat, and they both looked like ghosts. But then there were the nights. Nights when Cole's voice echoed in her dreams. Not the venomous words he used to wield, but the apologies, the confusion, the haunting what-ifs. Nights when she stared at Liam as he slept and felt a terrifying thought snake into her chest. What if I ruin this too? It started small. A flinch when Liam touched her waist unexpectedly while she was doing dishes. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when he said, "I love you." A hollow ache when he mentioned meeting his sister, and she didn't know how to explain that family still scared her. Liam noticed. He didn't press, didn't corner her. He just started showing up a little softer, sitting a little longer, reassuring without speaking. One evening, after a long day arranging spring bouquets and fielding bridal tantrums, Calla came home to find the apartment filled with lavender-scented steam. Liam had drawn her a bath. "You don't have to say anything," he said, holding her hand. "Just soak. I'll be right here if you need me." And that's when she cracked. The tears came quietly at first, then harder, deeper, like a dam bursting from the weight of everything she'd kept hidden behind polite smiles and curated strength. He helped her into the tub, kissed the top of her head, and sat on the floor beside her as she wept. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" he asked gently. "For not being whole. For still being afraid." Liam looked at her, those ocean-gray eyes filled with steady light. "Calla, healing doesn't mean you stop being afraid. It means you keep going, even when you are." The next morning, she called in sick to work. She wasn't sick, not in the way her boss would understand. But her chest felt like it had been hollowed out, and she couldn't imagine smiling at another customer today. Instead, she pulled out her journal. Not the one where she wrote floristry orders and wedding quotes. This one was raw, filled with sketches of memories, black ink smudged by tears. Confessions she hadn't said out loud. She turned to a blank page and wrote, "Things I'm still afraid of. Letting someone in too far. Letting someone down. Becoming what broke me. That Liam will wake up one day and realize I'm too much." She stared at the list, then added, "But I'm trying. Every damn day I'm trying." Later that week, Liam surprised her with something unexpected. "Therapy," he said simply, handing her a brochure. "Not because I think you're broken, but because I know how hard you're fighting. And you shouldn't have to fight alone." Calla hesitated. She'd been to couples therapy once with Cole. It had been a disaster, a performance. But this felt different. "I'll go," she said softly. "But I want to go alone. Just me." Liam smiled. "That's the best kind." The therapist's name was Dr. Maren Whitfield, a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and blunt honesty. Calla sat across from her in a softly lit office that smelled like peppermint and books. "So," Maren said after they settled, "why now?" Calla hesitated, fingers twisting the fabric of her sleeve. "Because I'm tired of being scared of happiness." That's a good place to start. Over the next few sessions, Calla peeled herself open, slowly, like old wallpaper coming off in layers.
She talked about Cole.
About the emotional erosion that had made her question her worth, her instincts, her right to want more. She talked about Liam, his patience, his steadiness, the way he never pushed but always stayed. And most of all, she talked about herself. "I don't know how to stop looking for exits," she said one day. "Even in the good moments. My mind's always preparing for the fall." Maren nodded. "That's the trauma talking. It teaches us that nothing safe lasts. But you're not who you were. And you don't have to treat every kindness like a trick." One night in April, Liam cooked dinner, lemon herb salmon and roasted vegetables. Calla had just gotten home from therapy and looked exhausted but lighter, somehow. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Actually, yeah." They sat on the floor with plates on their laps, music humming softly in the background. At one point, Liam reached for her hand, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned toward him. "I need to tell you something." "Okay."
"I'm scared. Still."
"Not all the time, but enough. And some days, it makes me quiet or distant or weirdly emotional about something small. But I'm not running. I'm just learning how to stay." Liam squeezed her hand. "Calla, I don't need you to be fearless. I just need you to be honest. That's all I've ever needed." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You make it easier. You make it worth it." Spring turned to early summer. Calla still had nightmares occasionally, but they no longer dictated her days. The pain was still there, but it didn't scream anymore. It whispered, and she was learning to answer kindly instead of shutting it down. She started drawing again, something she hadn't done since college. Not for work, not for anyone else. Just for herself. Flowers, silhouettes, tangled vines with tiny hearts hidden inside. One evening, she showed Liam a piece. "It's beautiful," he said, studying it. "What's it called?" "Scar bloom," she replied. "Because sometimes the ugliest wounds grow the most unexpected beauty." He kissed her softly. "Just like you." On the 6-month anniversary of their first date, Liam took her to a rooftop garden. It overlooked the city skyline, stars scattered across the velvet sky. Lanterns hung between trellises of climbing roses. They sat under a blanket, sipping cider, and Calla looked around, heart full. "You okay?" Liam asked. She nodded, eyes shimmering. "I think I'm finally not waiting for the other shoe to drop." He smiled. "That's progress." "No," she corrected. "That's love." She didn't wake up healed one day. There was no final moment of triumph, no thunderclap signaling the end of her pain. But there was laughter. There was breath. There was peace. And for the first time in her adult life, Calla wasn't surviving. She was living. Even when healing hurt, the invitation was printed on thick, off-white cardstock, with Calla's name embossed in elegant copperplate script. It didn't feel real, not when she held it in her hand, not even as she pinned it to the refrigerator with the same magnet that used to hold Liam's notes that read, "Don't forget to smile today." But this wasn't a note. It was an announcement. It was a statement to the world that she, Calla Whitmore, was no longer hiding behind layers of caution and scars. She was about to step into the light, into a space where her inner world, once broken and buried, was now framed in colors and strokes. The gallery was called the Wren's Nest, nestled in a quiet corner of downtown Portland. An old bookstore had once occupied the space, and something about its past life as a keeper of stories lingered in the way sunlight filtered through its oversized windows.
Now.
It bore stories painted rather than printed. Calla arrived early, a bundle of nerves tucked beneath her ribcage. Liam had offered to come with her, but she'd declined.
Tonight.
She needed to arrive alone, to prove to herself that she could. Inside, the scent of eucalyptus and lemon oil lingered in the air. The gallery director, a soft-spoken woman named Maris, gave her a warm hug and motioned toward the far wall. "They're ready," she said. "Are you?" Calla turned to face the wall. 10 paintings, each one a whisper of a chapter she hadn't dared speak aloud before. They weren't labeled with anything but numbers. No names, no stories attached, just color, emotion, memory. The first was abstract, shades of deep navy and ash gray, like storm clouds wrestling in a winter sky. It was called Fracture, and though no one else might see it, Calla knew exactly which moment it captured. The day Cole had slammed the door and didn't look back. The second, still, was muted gold and rust, representing the silence that followed. Weightless. The third burst with spring hues. It depicted no shape, but to her, it was the first breath she'd taken in her new apartment, away from everything. As the gallery filled with murmurs, footsteps, and clinking glasses, Calla stood in the corner, unseen. She watched strangers tilt their heads, smile, frown. Some pointed, some whispered. A few stood longer than others in front of her darker pieces. Then came Redemption, the 5th piece. Bright and open. The color of Liam's old flannel shirt. The blush of her cheeks the first time he made her laugh uncontrollably. The orange-yellow of sunlit mornings after stormy nights of shared tears. "Who's the artist?" a voice asked behind her. Calla turned slowly, coming face to face with a woman in a velvet coat and dramatic earrings. She had the kind of presence that made others part like water. "I am," Calla said softly. The woman smiled, leaning closer to inspect redemption. "You've turned grief into grace. This one feels like forgiveness." Calla didn't reply, but her throat tightened. The night moved like slow honey. People filtered in and out. More than once, someone asked if she sold her work. She hadn't planned for that. She hadn't painted to sell. She'd painted to survive. But when a little boy stopped in front of Weightless and pointed, "Mom, look. That's what it looks like when I have dreams," Calla felt her soul exhale. Near the end of the night, just as her legs started to tire, Liam walked in. He was in a navy coat, holding a single sunflower. No grand gestures, just a small, knowing smile. "You came," she whispered as he approached. "Would have come earlier, but I figured I'd let the spotlight be yours," he said. "Besides, I've seen these paintings before. Just not like this." They walked together, slowly, from canvas to canvas. Liam didn't ask for explanations. He knew better than anyone how heavy her memories had been. He didn't need to know what each piece meant. He already did. When they reached the final painting, Reclamation, Calla's breath caught. This was the newest one. The one she had painted in a frenzy just 3 weeks ago. It had hues of green and gold, the silhouette of a garden bench, and the barest trace of 2 figures, blurred, but close. Liam reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "This one's my favorite," he said. She looked up at him. "Why?" "Because it's you.
Not the you who survived.
Not the you who fought or broke or bled. But the you who started again. The you who let herself be seen." Calla didn't cry. She thought she might. But instead she smiled. A photographer from a local arts blog asked to take her picture. She hesitated. But Liam nodded. And Maris gave her a gentle look from across the room. So she stood by Reclamation, hands still in Liam's, and let herself be photographed. Her smile was quiet. Not the forced one she had worn in family portraits. Not the brittle one she used to appease Cole when he asked her to look happy for once. It was real. Later, when the gallery emptied and the staff began to stack glasses and fold tablecloths, Calla walked to the middle of the space and turned in a full circle. Just a year ago, she couldn't even enter a coffee shop without checking for exits. Now she had invited strangers into the rawest corners of her life. "You did it," Liam said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders.
"No," she said.
"We did." He smiled, kissing the side of her head. That night, back at their apartment, Calla sat on the balcony with a cup of herbal tea and her sketchbook. Instead of sketching trauma, she drew possibility. Instead of reliving the past, she imagined a future. A small art studio. A class for trauma survivors. Maybe a collaboration with the gallery. A book, even. For the first time in years, her mind was not replaying pain but composing hope. Before heading to bed, she pinned the gallery invitation to her bedroom mirror. Not as a reminder of what she had done, but of what she could do next. As she turned off the lights, Liam's voice called softly from bed. "You coming?" "Yeah," she said, slipping under the sheets. And when she curled into his warmth, she didn't flinch, didn't recoil, didn't brace for anything but dreams. Spring arrived early that year. The morning air carried a softness, a kind of forgiving warmth that made Portland's sidewalks steam gently after a rain. Trees were bursting with white and pink blossoms, and storefronts set out their chalkboards like open arms. The world felt reborn, and so did Calla. The gallery show had passed, but its echo lingered. Her paintings had found homes, some in quiet apartments, some in bustling offices. One piece even hung in a women's shelter, donated anonymously. The director told her it gave the women permission to breathe. Calla had smiled and cried quietly in the car afterward. Life didn't explode into perfection. There were still mornings where her hands trembled for no reason, still nights when Liam reached for her during sleep, feeling her flinch before she softened into him.
But there was grace now.
And choice. And a garden. Not a metaphorical one, a real garden. They'd moved into a little craftsman bungalow on the east side, with a yard just big enough for dreams. The porch sagged, the fence leaned, but Calla saw what it could become. "This place is going to bloom," she said the first time they stood on the overgrown lawn. Liam, holding a cardboard box labeled kitchen stuff plus old TA, cassette beneath her temple.
"So will you."
In the weeks that followed, they pulled weeds and unearthed bricks that had once formed a path. Calla planted lavender, sage, and peonies in a bed shaped like a crescent moon. Liam hung fairy lights and built a bench from salvaged wood. They named the lemon tree in the corner Clementine. But the real planting happened in moments, in shared breakfasts with mismatched mugs, in Calla's laughter echoing in the hall, in Liam's quiet humming while painting the back gate seafoam green. And one morning, she found a folded note inside her gardening glove. It read, "Even the earth needs time to rest before it blossoms.
So do you.
But look at you now, blooming wildly."
Elle.
Calla pressed it to her chest and smiled into the sky. Then came the letter. She hadn't expected it, not after all this time. The envelope was thin, addressed in neat handwriting that made her stomach lurch. Cole Bennett. Postmarked from Seattle. No return address. Just a name. She sat with it for 2 hours, unopened. When she finally broke the seal, she found 2 pages.
Short.
Almost clinical. An apology. An admission.
No excuses.
I'm in therapy. Not asking for anything.
Just needed you to know I've changed.
I was wrong. I was weak. You didn't deserve it. You never did. At the bottom, I saw your name in an article. Your art. It's beautiful. Like you always were. She didn't cry. She didn't call. She folded it neatly and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk. Liam found her sitting by the garden with a faraway look. "Ghosts?" he asked. "Just a final one," she replied. "I think it's finally gone now." He sat beside her, warm and quiet. Later that night, as they watched the stars emerge one by one over the garden, Calla said something she hadn't dared before. "I want to teach. Art.
No. Healing.
Through art. Through stillness. Through creating something when words fail." Liam turned to her, his face lit softly by string lights and moonshine. "Then let's do it." And they did. She began with one Saturday workshop. 5 women. 1 man. A table full of paint, broken mirrors, fabric scraps, and clay. She called it the Bear and Bloom Project. Each person arrived with a different grief: divorce, loss, identity, silence. Calla didn't ask them to talk. She asked them to make. And when they were done, she pinned their pieces on a long canvas wall, each contribution like a puzzle piece. Fragments of hope. Wounds stitched in color. Word spread. Her Saturdays grew. She started working with local clinics, shelters, even schools. Liam helped with logistics, but the soul of the space was always hers. One afternoon, she found a small envelope tucked beneath a paint jar. It wasn't from a student. It was from Liam. Inside, a ring. Simple. A silver band shaped like a winding vine, with a tiny bloom at the center. No card. No speech. Just him, standing behind her, eyes full of light. "I didn't plan it," he said. "It just felt like time." She looked at him. The man who had never asked her to be anything but herself. Who had stayed through storms, through silence, through the gentle unraveling of all her old knots. "I don't need a wedding," she said. "Me neither. But I'd like a vow." He smiled. So they wrote their own, not on a stage, not in front of crowds, but in the garden, barefoot, dandelions blooming like little suns. They stood beneath Clementine, her lemon tree, and read them aloud with birds as their choir. Calla's vow. "I was a cracked window.
You didn't fix me.
You stood with me and let the light in. I promise to do the same for you, always. Even when we fog, even when we rain."
Liam's vow.
"You didn't need saving. You needed space. I promise to never shrink you, never silence you, and always, always be your home, not your cage." They sealed it with laughter and kisses that tasted like citrus and spring. Years later, Calla would remember that day every time the breeze rustled through lavender and the sun warmed the porch. The garden flourished.
So, did they.
Her story never became a bestseller. No documentaries.
No viral interviews.
But people found her. Survivors. Artists. Seekers. And they left something behind. Sometimes a painting, sometimes a poem, sometimes just a hand squeezed in silent thanks. The house became a sanctuary, a studio, a place where pain was never shamed and joy was never rushed. One morning, a former student returned with a sketchbook. "I drew this for you," she said. It was Calla, arms open, hair like flames, roots growing from her feet into wildflowers. On the bottom it read, "She didn't just heal. She taught the rest of us how."
Calla cried then.
Not from sadness, but from the sacred weight of having turned hurt into harvest. And that night, as she sat on the porch beside Liam, she whispered the final line of the story she had never dared write until now. "I'm not broken anymore. I'm bloomin'." And for the first time, she believed it. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistory Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.